Sou 21 anos mais velha. E o que ele disse diante dos meus filhos ninguém esqueceu. Romance. Elena had grown used to the idea that life rarely asked permission before changing direction. At 48, she had learned to move through the world with quiet resilience, carrying both the weight of her past and the grace of a woman who had survived more than she ever admitted aloud. Her home, small but warm, held the echoes of old laughter and long nights in which she tucked her children into bed while trying to silence her own tears. Years after the divorce, she still felt its scars, the betrayal, the slow dismantling of trust, the loneliness that stayed behind even when the paperwork was done. But she had become a master at placing her pain in the background while she carried forward. Her days followed a predictable rhythm, something she found strangely comforting. Mornings meant preparing coffee while the sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting gentle lines of gold across the kitchen tiles. Afternoons often included conversations with her children, adult enough to have their own lives, but still young enough to need her presence. Evenings were filled with quiet rituals, folding clothes fresh from the line, watering the plants outside, watching movies together when their schedules allowed. It wasn't an extraordinary life, but it was hers, and its simplicity felt safe. Helena had long ago stopped imagining that romance would ever return to her. She had loved once, given everything she had, and watched it crumble. The idea of starting over seemed far-fetched, almost laughable. What place did passion or companionship have in the life of a woman who had already crossed into her late 40s? She had convinced herself that she no longer needed anything beyond what she already had. The world, however, often reveals beauty precisely when one stops expecting it. One late afternoon in early autumn, as the air shifted from warm to crisp, she met him, Gabriel. A stranger at first glance, polished, confident, unmistakably younger, 21 years younger. He entered her life not with drama, but with a simple moment, a shared conversation during an errand, a comment that sparked an unexpected exchange of smiles. Helena noticed how his eyes, a deep and steady brown, seemed too thoughtful for someone his age. She wasn't used to being looked at that way, with curiosity, with genuine attention, with something almost like admiration. She told herself it meant nothing. People crossed paths every day. But Gabriel left an impression that lingered long after he walked away. She remembered the warmth in his voice, the way he listened without rushing her sentences, the quiet sincerity that softened his otherwise youthful energy. Helena tried to dismiss the flutter that rose in her chest. She refused to entertain the idea that someone like him might see her in a different light. She knew better than to feed hope. Yet, something inside her shifted. A memory of who she once was. A woman before the disappointments, before she learned to shrink herself to fit expectations. Gabriel awakened that memory without trying. It frightened her, but it also made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She found herself wondering what he thought of her, and the thought alone embarrassed her. She was a mother, nearly 50, grounded in responsibility and routine. Why would a man like Gabriel, full of ambition and youth, care about a woman whose life had been shaped by quiet sacrifices? Still, her heart reacted before her mind could intervene. And beneath all her worries, judgment, age, vulnerability, was a simple truth. She didn't want to be invisible anymore. Not to herself, not to life, not to the possibility of being seen, genuinely seen, by someone unexpected. Gabriel didn't know it yet, but his presence in her life had lit a spark she thought had died long ago. And though she tried to ignore it, to bury it beneath logic and fear, the spark remained. A small, steady flame, waiting. Gabriel lived in a world built on expectations. At 27, he was the kind of man people pointed to with pride, a successful lawyer, articulate, polished, moving quickly along the path laid out for him since childhood. His parents, wealthy and socially influential, had invested years shaping him into a reflection of the life they believed he should lead. His future was mapped with precision, partnerships, luxury, a marriage that reinforced the family's status. Yet beneath the polished exterior, Gabriel carried a silence he rarely allowed himself to examine. He had grown used to wearing masks. At work, he was sharp and unshakable. At home, he was the well-behaved son who never challenged tradition. Among friends, he played the role of the confident young man with a promising future. But inside, he was worn down by the pressure of constantly performing. He longed for something authentic, something that didn't feel like a script. And for years, he had convinced himself that longing was just a phase, something adulthood would erase. Then he met Helena. Their first encounter was brief, almost accidental. Yet it unsettled him more deeply than he expected. She was unlike anyone he knew, calm, grounded, real. There was no pretense in her presence, no competition, no superficial charm. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't need to. And that alone was enough to make him curious. He found himself replaying their conversation later that night, surprised at how natural it had felt. Her voice, steady and warm, lingered in his mind longer than it should have. Gabriel had met many women. Beautiful, well-educated, perfectly aligned with the lifestyle he was expected to embrace. But Helena stood apart. She carried a quiet strength, the kind shaped by years of hardship and perseverance. The way she observed the world, with a mixture of tenderness and caution, intrigued him. There was something undeniably captivating about a woman who didn't try to outshine others, yet somehow illuminated everything around her. But there was the age difference. 21 years. He knew it would be the first thing people noticed, the first thing they judged. His family would certainly disapprove, his colleagues would whisper, and society, always eager to critique, would label him with assumptions he had no interest in defending. Yet, the more he thought about Helena, the less these fears mattered. Her presence had stirred something inside him, something honest. It had been a long time since he felt that kind of sincerity. He tried to dismiss it. He told himself it was nothing more than admiration, a fleeting fascination. But each time he imagined never seeing her again, a heavy discomfort pressed against his chest. It wasn't infatuation, it was recognition. Helena reminded him of the kind of life he secretly desired. Peaceful, real, full of meaning rather than ambition. And perhaps that was why she frightened him in ways nothing else had. Gabriel began to notice how often he compared the women in his world to her. How their conversations, though lively, lacked the depth he sensed in Helena's silence. How their laughter felt rehearsed, while Helena's smallest smile felt earned. There was no competition between her and the rest. She simply existed in a category of her own. The thought of pursuing her, however, came with consequences. He knew that choosing someone like Helena would mean disappointing his family, facing criticism, stepping out of the carefully structured life built for him. But for the first time, he wondered if that structure was worth preserving. What was the point of success if it didn't bring peace? What was the meaning of achievement if it required ignoring the voice inside him that begged for authenticity? Helena had awakened that voice, and as much as Gabriel tried to ignore it, he sensed that his life was at a crossroads. One path led to the predictable, a future of stability, approval, and emotional emptiness. The other led to uncertainty, challenge, and the possibility of something real, something that made him feel alive, something shaped like Helena. Helena never expected her routine to shift, yet life sometimes rearranged itself in ways both subtle and profound. The day she met Gabriel for the second time arrived without planning, without meaning, and without any hint that it would lay the foundation for everything that would follow. She was carrying groceries home, moving slowly through the quiet street bathed in late afternoon light, when she saw him again, standing by his car, head lowered, reading something on his phone. The wind shifted gently, brushing her hair across her cheek. For a moment she considered walking past him unnoticed, but the world seemed to draw their paths together with quiet insistence. Gabriel lifted his gaze at the same moment she stepped forward. Their eyes met, not with surprise this time, but with recognition, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that something unsaid lived between them. Helena felt a stir of emotion deep in her chest, something fragile yet persistent. She tried to maintain her composure, reminding herself that he was just a man she had met once. Still, she couldn't ignore the way his presence softened the edges of her world. The air between them carried a stillness that neither tried to fill. Gabriel observed her with a calm curiosity, the kind that comes from seeing someone beyond surface impressions. To Helena, this felt strange. She wasn't accustomed to being looked at with such quiet attention. Over the years, she had learned to blend into the background of her own life, becoming a protector of others, rarely the one protected. But with him, there was a sense of being noticed, not for what she did, or for what she represented, but for who she truly was. They exchanged a few words about the weather, the neighborhood, the small details that bridged the space between strangers. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation lived a delicate current neither dared to name. Helena felt her pulse quicken at the realization that she enjoyed the sound of his voice, the steadiness of his presence. She caught herself wondering if this connection was allowed, if it had a place in her life. She dismissed the thought immediately. It was foolish. But the thought returned, persistent like breath. As they walked side by side toward her street, Gabriel slowed his pace to match hers. His gestures were understated. Small nods, gentle pauses, an attentiveness she had rarely received even in her marriage. He seemed comfortable in silence, which was something Helena deeply valued. Silence between them was not awkward. It was natural, like two melodies aligning without force. It felt as if her heart understood something before her mind was willing to accept it. Helena became aware of her surroundings shifting, the hum of distant traffic, the rustling of leaves, the warm glow of the sky. All of it felt heightened. She wondered if her perception had sharpened because of him, or because something inside her was waking up after years of dormancy. Gabriel, too, felt a kind of clarity he couldn't explain. Being near her grounded him, softening the restless ambition that usually pushed him forward. She represented a different pace of life, one guided not by expectation but by meaning. When they reached the corner where their paths would naturally separate, neither seemed eager to end the moment. Helena's hands were slightly trembling, though she held them firmly to her sides. Gabriel felt an unusual reluctance, sensing that letting her walk away so easily would leave an ache behind. He wasn't certain why this brief encounter affected him so deeply, but he knew, with quiet conviction, that he didn't want it to be the last. Helena finally stepped away, her steps slow, her heart beating louder than she wished. She didn't look back, afraid of what she might feel if she saw him still standing there. Yet she sensed that he continued watching her until she disappeared around the bend. When she reached her home, she leaned against the door for a moment, breath uneven, wondering how a simple meeting could disturb the emotional landscape she had spent years reinforcing. Gabriel remained where she had left him, the fading sun casting long shadows around him. He felt an inexplicable certainty that their lives were not meant to drift apart. Something about Helena resonated with a part of him he didn't know how to express. Something tender, honest, and deeply human. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense. It was recognition, the feeling of standing before someone who mirrored a truth he had long ignored. That night, Helena struggled to sleep, replaying the encounter in her mind. The warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his posture, the simplicity of their exchange. It all lingered like an echo. She tried to dismiss it, reminding herself of the years between them, the impossibility of it all. But no matter how she tried to silence her heart, a quiet truth remained. Something had shifted, and she could no longer pretend it hadn't. The first sign that Helena's life was changing came not from Gabriel, but from her children. They had always been protective of her, especially after the divorce, but lately their concern had sharpened into something more attentive. They noticed her lighter steps, the warmth returning to her cheeks, the moments when she seemed lost in thought with a faint smile touching her lips. They didn't know the cause, but they sensed the shift. Helena tried to conceal it, though she wasn't sure exactly what she was concealing. After all, nothing concrete had happened between her and Gabriel, but emotions, even the quiet ones, have a way of revealing themselves. One evening, her daughter asked if everything was fine, studying her with eyes that mirrored her own. Helena nodded, offering reassurance she hoped would suffice. Yet part of her wondered how long she could maintain the illusion. Introducing Gabriel to her children happened unexpectedly. It was a Saturday morning, the sunlight soft and the air carrying the scent of warm bread from a nearby bakery. Helena had taken a short walk when she crossed paths with Gabriel again. Their encounter felt natural, as though the universe itself had orchestrated their meetings with increasing frequency. They exchanged a few gentle words, the kind that warmed the quiet corners of her heart. As they walked back to her street, Helena's son appeared at the gate, holding a mug of coffee and watching them approach. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, and then into something more guarded. Her daughter soon appeared beside him, exchanging a subtle look with her brother. Helena felt her breath catch. She hadn't planned this. She wasn't ready. Yet there was no turning back. Gabriel greeted them with the same calm presence he carried everywhere. His tone was respectful, his posture composed. But Helena could sense the tension in her children. To them, he wasn't just a stranger. He was a man unmistakably younger than their mother. Their eyes flicked between Helena and Gabriel, silently asking questions they weren't ready to voice. The moment felt heavier than she expected. She realized then that her children had never seen her with another man since the divorce. She had shielded them from her own loneliness, giving them the impression that she no longer needed companionship. Seeing her with someone, even in a simple, innocent interaction, challenged everything they believed about her life. Gabriel seemed aware of the unspoken tension. He didn't step too close, didn't try to impose himself. Instead, he allowed the space between them to breathe. Helena admired him for that. She could feel her children's discomfort, a mix of protectiveness and disbelief. They had always seen her as steady, unchanging, almost frozen in a role she had never questioned. Now, confronted with the possibility of their mother's vulnerability, they didn't know how to react. As the morning unfolded, Helena invited Gabriel to sit for a moment on the porch. The children stayed nearby, watching like quiet observers of a scene they hadn't rehearsed for. Gabriel spoke with sincerity, his words measured, revealing nothing of the deeper currents he felt toward their mother. He answered their questions with patience and left enough space for their hesitation. Helena watched her children closely. Her daughter's arms were crossed, her expression torn between politeness and suspicion. Her son's gaze remained sharp, as if trying to decode Gabriel's intentions. They loved her deeply, and beneath their unease lived a fear. Fear that she might get hurt again. Fear that someone younger might not understand her worth. Fear that the pain of the past could return wearing a different face. Helena felt torn. She wanted to protect their hearts, but also her own. The presence of Gabriel beside her brought a warmth she hadn't felt in years. And yet, the presence of her children reminded her how fragile the balance of her world was. She wondered if she had the right to seek happiness if it meant destabilizing the certainty they clung to. When Gabriel eventually stood to leave, he offered a gentle farewell to her children, who responded with reserved politeness. Helena walked him part of the way, aware of their eyes following her. The street was quiet, the morning sun brushing the rooftops with gold. She felt an ache swelling in her chest, a blend of hope and fear, longing and restraint. Gabriel paused before turning the corner. There was a softness in his expression, an understanding of the complexity she was facing. Although neither spoke it aloud, both felt the quiet truth. Their connection was no longer just theirs. Others were becoming part of the weight. When Helena returned home, her children were waiting, not with anger, but with questions too delicate to ask. She felt their concern like a steady pulse in the air. In their eyes, she saw what she had forgotten. That love, even the quiet kind, could ripple through every part of a person's life. That day, Helena realized that her growing connection with Gabriel was not something she could hide. It demanded courage, and she wasn't yet sure if she had enough. Helena had always believed that emotional connection was something that belonged to her past, a memory preserved in soft colors, like an old photograph tucked into a drawer. Yet, as the days unfolded, she found herself thinking about Gabriel with a frequency that unsettled her. It wasn't the kind of longing that burned or demanded. It was a quiet presence, like a light that refused to fade even when she tried to look away. Every encounter, no matter how simple, seemed to carve a deeper space for him inside her life. Gabriel felt the same gravitational pull. He didn't chase it with urgency, but he didn't deny it either. His life had always been built on expectations, deadlines, and steady progress toward goals others had chosen for him. But Helena brought a different kind of clarity, a sense that some things didn't need to be achieved, only felt. When he was near her, he experienced a stillness he hadn't known he needed. She reminded him that meaning often lived in the pauses, not the accomplishments. They began sharing moments that stretched beyond the ordinary, walks through quiet streets where the world seemed to soften around them, small exchanges while their hands brushed lightly against each other when passing objects, the sound of her breath as she concentrated on something, calm yet deliberate, the way he observed her without expectation, simply absorbing the presence of someone who carried wisdom etched into her movements. They were not in a relationship. They were simply connecting. And yet, that connection began to shape the rhythm of their days. Helena didn't understand how someone so young could possess such emotional steadiness. Gabriel approached life with a sincerity she rarely saw in men her age, let alone younger ones. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke about her past, about the challenges of raising her children alone, about the weight she carried even when she pretended everything was fine. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't rush to offer solutions. He simply saw her, and being seen made her feel like she was slowly reassembling the parts of herself she had neglected. Gabriel, too, found his own reflection in her. She brought out qualities he didn't know he had: patience, gentleness, clarity. With her, he shed the armor he had worn for years. He didn't have to perform or prove anything. Helena didn't admire him for his career or ambition. She admired him for the person he was beneath the layers. Her presence made him want to slow down, to step away from the noise of his world, to finally breathe in a way that didn't feel rushed. But beneath the quiet beauty of their growing closeness, another truth lived. The outside world was beginning to notice. Neighbors looked longer than necessary. Friends whispered with vague curiosity. Even Helena's children watched her with new caution, trying to understand what was shifting in her. Gabriel sensed the pressure building, though he tried not to let it overshadow the tenderness they were cultivating. Still, he couldn't ignore the subtle tension that lingered whenever someone else witnessed their connection. Despite the growing awareness around them, their bond only deepened. Helena began to feel moments of unexpected vulnerability, sensations she had long forgotten, the warmth in her chest when Gabriel smiled, the flutter of anticipation when she sensed he might be nearby, the soft ache of wanting to speak to him at the end of a long day. These emotions frightened her, not because they were intense, but because they were undeniably real. She reminded herself often of the age difference, of her responsibilities, of the potential consequences. But each time she attempted to distance herself, something pulled her back, not through desire, but through recognition. Gabriel represented something she had lost, the possibility of hope, and the possibility of being loved not as a caretaker or a survivor, but as a woman. Gabriel felt the shift too. His feelings for Helena grew not from fascination, but from understanding. He saw beauty in her resilience, in her quiet strength, in the way she moved through life with dignity despite the scars she carried. He admired her not despite her age, but because of everything those years had taught her. Their connection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, like two separate currents beginning to flow in the same direction. They didn't label it, they didn't rush it, but both understood that they were stepping into something delicate and profound, something that would demand courage from both of them. And while neither spoke of it aloud, they both sensed the truth quietly blooming. Their hearts were no longer separate. A bond had formed, gentle, honest, and deep enough to challenge everything around them. The world has a way of observing what it does not understand, and Helena felt that scrutiny sharpen as her connection with Gabriel became more visible. What had once been private moments, quiet exchanges, shared glances, the soft unfolding of something tender, now existed beneath curious eyes. People talked, not loudly, not openly, but whispers have a way of reaching their destination, even when spoken behind closed doors. Helena noticed it first at the market. A pair of women paused their conversation when she walked past, their gazes lingering as if piecing together a rumor. Later, a neighbor offered a smile too tight to be genuine, followed by a comment layered with implication. Each small interaction added weight to a growing discomfort inside her. She had never been the subject of gossip before. Her life had been defined by responsibility, not mystery. Yet now, for the first time in years, her private emotions were becoming public speculation. Gabriel sensed the shift as well. His colleagues asked subtle questions when they noticed the changes in his routine. A friend raised an eyebrow when Gabriel canceled plans to spend a quiet evening near Helena's neighborhood. Even his family, with their polished expectations, began inquiring about his schedule too often, as if anticipating a disturbance. Their interest was not born of care, but of control. The judgment wasn't loud at first, but it was present in the glances that lasted 1 second too long. In the silence that followed a conversation when Helena entered a room. In the unspoken assumption that a woman nearing 50 had no place in the interest of a much younger man. Society had long built its expectations on rigid structures, and their connection existed far outside the boundaries of what others considered acceptable. Helena felt the pressure most intensely through her children. They looked at her with eyes searching for answers she wasn't ready to give. They didn't accuse, but they questioned her choices silently, their expressions filled with uncertainty. She understood their protectiveness. They had watched her endure pain, watched her rebuild herself from the remnants of a marriage that had left her emotionally stripped. To them, the idea of their mother entering a new relationship, especially with someone so young, was simply unimaginable. Gabriel, however, carried his own burdens. His family would not accept Helena easily. He knew this long before he admitted it. His parents had mapped his future with a precision he had never fully agreed to, and a woman like Helena, mature, grounded, with a life already molded, didn't fit their vision. Not because of cruelty, but because of expectation. Gabriel had never challenged them. Until now, the weight of judgment created a tension around them, subtle but constant. Helena found herself retreating into her thoughts, questioning whether she had been naive to believe she could allow herself a moment of happiness. She feared the consequences, not for herself, but for Gabriel. She didn't want her presence to cause him pain or conflict. Yet, Gabriel never faltered. His presence remained steady, his eyes unwavering whenever he looked at her. He seemed to understand the unspoken fears that lingered between them. He approached her with patience, as though acknowledging that the world around them was shifting in ways that demanded care. The more others judged, the more determined he became to stand firm beside her, even if she didn't yet believe she deserved that loyalty. The social pressure intensified during a community event. Helena attended with her children, hoping for a quiet evening, but the moment Gabriel arrived unexpectedly, the air seemed to change. Conversations paused. A few heads turned. Her son stiffened beside her. Her daughter lowered her gaze. Gabriel, unaware of the scrutiny at first, soon felt the weight of the room pressing in. Helena's heart tightened. She realized then that their connection was no longer something she could hide. She also realized how vulnerable she felt, exposed not because of wrongdoing, but because of the possibility of being misunderstood. The fear of humiliation lingered like a shadow behind her every thought. As Gabriel approached her, the silent ripple in the room grew. No one spoke, but their expressions said enough. Helena felt the judgment settle on her shoulders, heavy and undesired. Gabriel, standing beside her, sensed her discomfort. He offered a presence that was protective without being possessive, calm without being passive. In that moment, he became not just a man drawn to her, but a quiet force, standing against the tide of disapproval. When the evening ended, Helena understood something she hadn't admitted before. Their connection was no longer just an internal experience. It was becoming a public truth. And truths, once revealed, demanded courage. She wasn't sure if she had enough. But Gabriel's steady presence suggested that he did, and that perhaps courage sometimes existed in shared form. The evening that marked the true beginning of the conflict arrived quietly, without warning, as most life-changing moments do. Helena had agreed to join Gabriel for a small family dinner, an invitation he extended with sincerity, believing it was time to gently integrate the two worlds he cared about most. She accepted with caution, hoping her presence would remain simple and unremarkable. But as she entered the elegant dining room, she immediately sensed the shift in atmosphere, a subtle tightening in the air that echoed through every gaze drawn toward her. Gabriel's family was composed of people accustomed to polished appearances and predetermined expectations. Their lives moved according to well-maintained schedules, social obligations, and the silent pressure to maintain a certain image. Helena, with her soft presence and understated elegance, stood out not because she tried to, but because she existed outside of everything they recognized as normal. Their eyes lingered longer than necessary. Their smiles held restraint, not warmth. They assessed her with politeness that bordered on suspicion. Gabriel, however, remained steady. His posture reflected calm certainty, as if he had anticipated the tension but refused to bend under it. He moved with quiet assurance between Helena and his family, hoping to create some balance. Yet even he could not dissolve the unease that settled around the table like a second tablecloth, invisible, yet undeniable. Helena felt exposed in ways she hadn't expected. She wasn't ashamed of who she was, but she suddenly became aware of the things that set her apart: her age, her history, her lack of connection to the polished, privileged world surrounding her. She noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Gabriel's relatives, the slight raise of brows, the way conversations paused when she entered a room or responded thoughtfully to a question. She had not come to impress them, but she also hadn't anticipated how deeply their judgment would press against her. Gabriel sensed her discomfort and positioned himself near her whenever possible. His presence offered silent reassurance, though it did little to ease the pressure emanating from his family. The unspoken question hung in the air. Why her? It wasn't asked aloud, but it reverberated through every expression his relatives wore. Tension reached its peak when one of Gabriel's siblings made a vaguely pointed remark about life phases and appropriate timing, words delivered with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. The comment wasn't directed explicitly at Helena, but the implication was unmistakable. The room seemed to tighten around her. She felt a slow warmth rise in her chest, part hurt, part humiliation, part resignation. She had feared this, but the reality still stung. Gabriel noticed the shift in her posture. Something inside him broke open, revealing a truth he had held quietly for weeks. He looked at his family, people he had respected his whole life, and felt a clarity he had never experienced before. For the first time, he understood that choosing Helena wasn't just about affection or attraction. It was about stepping into his own life, beyond the expectations that had shaped him since childhood. And then, in that charged, fragile silence, he spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. His words were calm, deliberate, yet powerful enough to ripple through the entire room. In his honesty, he revealed the depth of his admiration for Helena, the peace he found in her presence, the authenticity she awakened in him, things he had never articulated aloud. He expressed the weight of living a life designed by others and the relief of finally choosing something for himself. His words landed like a quiet storm. Helena felt every syllable settle inside her with a mixture of shock and tenderness. She hadn't expected him to expose his heart so openly, especially not in front of people whose approval he had once valued so deeply. His vulnerability disarmed her, and yet she also felt the heavy burden of his honesty, a weight that now rested on both of them. Gabriel's family reacted with stunned silence. Some exchanged startled glances. Others lowered their eyes. It wasn't the content of his words that unsettled them. It was the certainty within them. Certainty that he meant every word. Certainty that he had chosen Helena, not as a rebellion, but as a truth. The rest of the evening passed in softened tones and hesitant smiles. The tension never fully dissolved, but something had shifted. Gabriel had drawn a line in the sand, and everyone at the table knew it. When the night ended, Helena felt a mixture of gratitude and fear. Gabriel's courage moved her, yet she couldn't ignore the storm his honesty had stirred. She knew that love, real love, required bravery. But she also knew that every act of bravery demanded a price. The days after the family dinner unfolded with a heaviness Helena could not shake. Gabriel's words, spoken with such sincerity and conviction, replayed in her mind with a mixture of warmth and dread. She had never been defended so openly, never been valued so deeply in front of people who held such influence over someone she cared about. His honesty touched her, but it also terrified her. She felt as though a line had been crossed, a line that separated longing from consequence. Helena carried the weight of responsibility with her everywhere. She had spent years building stability for her children, protecting them from further turmoil after the collapse of her marriage. Now, the possibility that her involvement with Gabriel could bring new conflicts into their lives left her unsettled. She sensed her children watching her with caution, filled with questions they didn't ask but clearly felt. She didn't blame them. They had witnessed her wounds. They feared seeing her break again. Gabriel, on the other hand, seemed steadier than ever. His certainty had crystallized, shaped by the clarity he felt after confronting his family. He reached out to Helena with gentle consistency, offering presence rather than pressure. But even in his calmness, he sensed her withdrawal. She spoke with warmth but kept emotional distance. She smiled, but only with half her heart. She listened, but her gaze often drifted to the horizon, as if searching for a path that led away from conflict. One morning, after a night spent wrestling with her thoughts, Helena made a decision born not of doubt in her feelings, but of fear for the consequences. She convinced herself that stepping away from Gabriel was the only way to protect him, from his family's expectations, from social scrutiny, from the judgment that followed them like an unwelcome shadow. She also believed she was protecting her children, who were already unsettled by the shift in her life. It wasn't sacrifice in the romantic sense. It was surrender to a truth she believed she could not change. She began creating distance in subtle ways. She reduced their meetings, shortened their conversations, embraced the quiet of her home with renewed insistence. She convinced herself that detachment was an act of practicality, a return to the routine that had once kept her safe. Yet every step away from him felt like a small tear inside her chest. Gabriel noticed immediately. He didn't accuse or cling. He simply watched her with a mixture of concern and patience, as though waiting for her to reveal the truth weighing on her heart. His gentleness only made it harder. Helena had expected him to retreat, to grow frustrated or discouraged. Instead, he moved with understanding, refusing to let her carry the burden alone. But the separation came anyway. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses and bathed the quiet street in muted gold, Helena finally allowed herself to speak the truth she had been holding behind her ribs. She told him she needed space, not because her feelings had faded, but because they had grown too strong. She feared the consequences more than the longing. She feared hurting him, disappointing her children, disrupting the fragile balance of both their worlds. Gabriel listened in silence. Though his heart tightened, he didn't attempt to persuade her otherwise. He understood her fear, even if he didn't share it. He recognized the protective instinct in her, the way she tried to shield others even when it tore at her. His stillness was not resignation. It was respect for her struggle. After she walked away, Gabriel remained standing beneath the fading light, his thoughts heavy but unmoving. He did not believe their story was ending. He felt the truth too deeply for that. But he also understood that love sometimes demanded distance, not as an ending, but as a necessary pause. Helena needed time to rediscover her own courage, and he needed to let her find it without forcing his presence into the process. Helena returned home with an ache she could barely carry. Her children found her quiet that evening, moving through the house with soft steps as though the walls themselves felt her sorrow. She pretended everything was fine, but heartbreak has a way of echoing through gestures. Slower movements, longer pauses, softer breaths. Her life returned to its familiar rhythm, but every moment felt emptier without the calm certainty of Gabriel's presence. Yet beneath the sadness lived something steady, the knowledge that what they had shared was real. And real things, Helena realized, often returned, but only when both hearts were ready to meet again. The weeks that followed the separation unfolded with a quiet heaviness Helena carried like an invisible bruise. She resumed her familiar routines, moving through the days with a practiced steadiness, but her heart no longer aligned with the rhythm she had once considered safe. Each morning, she brewed her coffee and watched the steam rise slowly, as if waiting for the warmth to reach places inside her that had grown cold again. Yet even in the silence of her home, she could not escape the memory of Gabriel's presence, the calm certainty in his eyes, the patience in his gestures, the way he had seen her without hesitation. She realized that she had returned to a life shaped more by fear than peace. The distance she created was meant to protect her children and shield Gabriel from conflict, but it had left her confronting a truth she had avoided for years. She had spent too long living in service to others' expectations. Her choices had always been tempered by the need to provide stability, to prevent disappointment, to avoid repeating the fractures of her past. But for the first time, she questioned whether self-denial was the same as self-preservation. As she moved through her days, she began noticing the small things Gabriel had awakened in her, the way she paused to appreciate warm sunlight on her skin, the rediscovery of her own laughter, soft yet genuine, the renewed awareness of her strength, not as a shield, but as a quiet flame. She realized her life had expanded because of him, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle shifts that reshaped how she viewed herself. She was not just a mother, a provider, or a survivor. She was a woman capable of feeling deeply, of longing, of choosing herself. Her children, perceptive in their own ways, sensed the change. They saw the weight behind her eyes, the contemplative stillness that settled over her during quiet moments. They asked gentle questions, and though Helena answered with reassurance, she understood that their concern came from love, not judgment. She realized she had underestimated them, underestimated their ability to accept her desires, their capacity to understand that she too needed room to grow beyond the roles she had long occupied. One evening, as she folded laundry in the soft light of dusk, Helena felt a clarity settle into her. She understood that avoiding pain did not create safety. It only created emptiness. Gabriel had never asked her to sacrifice her family or to choose between the people she loved. He had simply offered presence, a presence that honored her past and embraced her present. The resistance she felt had come not from him, but from the fear that she no longer deserved a love that saw her with such tenderness. Her heart, however, refused to accept that fear. It nudged her toward honesty, toward courage, toward the possibility of building a life shaped by desire rather than obligation. She remembered the strength in Gabriel's posture during the family dinner, the unwavering steadiness of a man who had chosen his truth even when surrounded by opposition. If he possessed that courage at 27, perhaps she could find her own at 48. She stepped outside into the evening air, inhaling deeply as the cool breeze brushed against her skin. The sky was painted with soft shades of lavender and gold, the colors of transition, neither day nor night, but something beautifully in between. She realized she, too, had been living in an in-between space, caught between who she used to be and who she was becoming. The truth settled in her with quiet certainty. She did not want a life without Gabriel. She did not want to retreat into safety at the expense of authenticity. She wanted the warmth he brought into her days, the serenity he inspired, the connection that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced before. She wanted a future shaped by mutual understanding, not by the boundaries others believed she should respect. And with that realization came the beginning of her awakening. Helena knew she had to confront the fears that had guided her for too long. She would need to speak with her children openly, not as someone seeking permission, but as a woman who believed in her own right to pursue happiness. She would need to stand before Gabriel with honesty, admitting not only her love for him, but also the fear that had held her back. She understood that moving forward required vulnerability, a vulnerability she had always reserved for survival, not for connection. Yet for the first time, she felt ready, not fearless, but ready. Helena looked at the sky one last time before stepping back inside. The decision was made. Her life could no longer remain suspended between hope and hesitation. She would follow the truth her heart had whispered all along. And with that truth came the quiet courage she had been searching for. The morning Helena decided to find Gabriel arrived with unusual calm, as though the world itself recognized the significance of the day. She woke early, before the sunlight fully touched the windows, and felt a steadiness in her chest that had been absent for weeks. It wasn't confidence, nor certainty. It was acceptance. Acceptance of her own heart, of the path she wished to choose, of the possibility that life still held room for her to begin again. She prepared herself slowly, not out of vanity, but reverence. Every movement carried intention. Brushing her hair, choosing clothes that felt comfortable, pausing to inhale deeply before stepping outside. The air held the gentle chill of early morning, crisp enough to wake the senses. She walked down the familiar streets, but they felt different now. Lighter, quieter, almost ceremonial. With every step, she released a fragment of the fear that had kept her anchored to the past. Gabriel's neighborhood was still half asleep when she arrived. The stillness around her made her heart thrum with anticipation, as though the silence itself was watching her. When he finally opened the door, the surprise in his gaze softened into something warm and steady. His posture held the same calm she remembered, the quiet confidence of a man who had learned to move through life with intentionality. Helena didn't speak immediately. She didn't need to. The space between them filled with something deep and unspoken, a recognition that time apart had not fractured what lived quietly beneath their silence. Gabriel saw in her eyes the shift that had taken root, an openness, a willingness, a strength shaped by vulnerability rather than fear. They walked together through a nearby park, where the morning sun filtered through the trees in soft rays. The world seemed suspended in a gentle pause, creating a sanctuary where their emotions could settle without interruption. Helena felt the weight she had carried begin to dissolve, the fear of judgment, the tension surrounding her children, the uncertainty that had once clouded her thoughts. All of it felt smaller now, not absent, but manageable. Gabriel listened as Helena shared the truth she had held inside her chest. She spoke of the fear that had guided her choices, the sense of responsibility that had overshadowed her desires, the guilt she felt for wanting something deeply personal. She admitted how the silence between them had revealed the depth of her longing, the completeness of the space he occupied in her life. Her voice carried neither apology nor hesitation, only clarity. Gabriel's expression softened in a way that made Helena feel both grounded and weightless. His stillness was not passive. It was filled with understanding, as though he recognized the courage it took for her to speak her truth. He had not waited for her with impatience or expectation. He had simply trusted that her heart would find its way to him when it was ready. They continued walking, and the world around them seemed to sync with their quiet steps. Birds stirred in the branches, leaves rustled in the early breeze, sunlight warmed the path ahead. The ordinary beauty of the morning mirrored the simplicity of their connection, something that required no grand gestures, only presence. Helena understood then that rebeginning wasn't about erasing the past, but about choosing to move forward with it. She carried her history not as a burden, but as a testament to the strength she had cultivated. Gabriel wasn't replacing a chapter of her life. He was joining her in the next one where she allowed herself to be loved without shrinking, without apologizing for her age, without hiding behind responsibility. When they finally paused beneath a large oak tree, Helena felt a profound sense of belonging, a feeling she had believed was reserved for younger years. Gabriel stood close enough for her to sense the warmth of his presence, but not so close that it overwhelmed her. His patience mirrored her pace, honoring the rhythm of her heart. As the morning unfolded, they spoke not about the obstacles ahead, but about the quiet truth that had brought them together, the desire for authenticity, the pursuit of peace, the recognition of a bond that neither age nor judgment could diminish. Their rebeginning was not dramatic. It was gentle, grounded, built on understanding rather than urgency. Later, when Helena returned home, her children watched her with careful curiosity. She didn't hide the softness in her expression, nor the calm that followed her steps. She spoke to them with honesty, not to justify her choices, but to share the truth of her heart. Their reactions were uncertain. But beneath their hesitation, she sensed something new: acceptance, slowly forming. Life didn't transform instantly. Challenges remained, whispers would continue, and insecurities would occasionally resurface. But Helena no longer feared them. She had chosen a path aligned with her truth, and Gabriel walked beside her with steadiness that felt like home. Their re-beginning wasn't loud or grand. It was quiet, sincere, and deeply human, and for Helena that was enough.